My son invited me to a reconciliation dinner. I was driving to see him with hope in my heart, but a call from my lawyer turned everything upside down. Call me immediately. It's about your son. What I learned broke my heart. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The front door slammed shut with such force that my coffee cup rattled against its saucer. Heavy footsteps thundered across my porch, deliberate, angry steps that made the old wooden boards groan in protest. I barely had time to set down my evening paper before Wayne burst through my front door without so much as a knock. "Dad, I urgently need money. You have to sell this old house and give me my share." No hello, no apology for the intrusion, just demands delivered with the kind of aggressive desperation I'd never heard from my son before. His face was flushed red, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd been pacing in his car for hours before working up the nerve to storm in here. I rose slowly from my reading chair, gesturing toward the kitchen with as much dignity as I could muster. "Wayne, you look upset. Let me make you some coffee, and I don't want your coffee." He swept his arm dismissively, nearly knocking over the lamp on my side table. "I want answers. I want what's rightfully mine. Your share." The words came out sharper than I intended. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the back of my chair. "This is my house, Wayne. I worked my whole life for this." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed off my living room walls. "You're gonna die soon anyway. Why do you need this huge house?" The cruelty of those words hit me like a physical blow. This was my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle in the very driveway he just marched up, the young man I'd walked down the aisle at his wedding. Now he stood in my home, my sanctuary, telling me I was already dead. "Wayne," I started, trying to find some trace of the son I'd raised, but he wasn't finished. He slammed his fist down on my coffee table, so hard that the wooden surface jumped. "You're being selfish, Emily, and I have expenses you can't even imagine. Real problems. Not just sitting here reading newspapers all day like some useless. Get out." The words left my mouth quietly, but with absolute finality. Wayne stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. I said, "Get out of my house." I pointed toward the door, my fingers steady despite the rage building in my chest. "And don't you dare step foot on my property again." For a moment, Wayne looked genuinely shocked. Maybe he'd expected me to crumble, to hand over my life's work without a fight. His face cycled through confusion, then anger, then something darker. "You'll regret this, old man." He turned toward the door, then spun back to face me one more time. "When you're lying alone in some nursing home, remember that you chose this." The door slammed behind him with even more violence than when he'd entered. Through my front window, I watched him stomp to his black BMW, rev the engine aggressively, and tear out of my driveway fast enough to leave rubber marks on the concrete. I stood there in the sudden silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. The house felt different now, contaminated somehow by the poison Wayne had brought into it. Outside, the March evening was settling into dusk, and the street lights were beginning to flicker on along Maple Street. My legs felt unsteady, so I sank back into my reading chair. The newspaper lay scattered on the floor where I dropped it when Wayne first entered. The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt, something I rarely did, but tonight felt different. My fingers lingered on the cool metal as I tried to process what had just happened in my own living room. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. I moved through the room slowly, my slippers shuffling against the hardwood floors. Margaret and I had refinished together 20 years ago. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago. Yet somehow nothing felt familiar anymore. I stopped at the mantel above the fireplace where our family photographs stood in their neat row. Wayne's high school graduation picture smiled back at me. Cap and gown, that proud expression when he'd been accepted to Ohio State. I'd worked double shifts at the engineering firm for 3 months to pay his first semester tuition. My fingers traced the silver frame. 42 years, I gave him everything. College on my dime, first car, help with the mortgage when he and Emily bought their first house. The words hung in the empty air. I picked up another photo. Wayne's wedding day, his arm around Emily, both of them glowing with happiness. I'd paid for half that wedding, too. $15,000 I'd saved for my own retirement. Gladly handed over, because I wanted my son to have the perfect day. Moving to my reading chair, I settled into the worn leather cushions that had molded to my body over the years. This chair had been Margaret's last Christmas gift to me before the cancer took her. She'd saved up for months, buying it piece by piece on layaway at the furniture store downtown. I reached for the framed photo on the side table. Margaret and me on our 35th anniversary, just 2 years before she passed. Her gray hair was perfectly styled, her smile genuine and warm. Margaret, if you could see what our son has become. But could she? Had there been signs I'd missed? I try to remember when Wayne had started changing. Was it after Margaret died? Or had the transformation been so gradual that I'd simply refused to see it? I calculated in my head a habit from my engineering days. Wayne's college, $68,000 total. His wedding, my $15,000 contribution. The down payment loan for his first house that he'd never paid back, $25,000. The business loan when he'd started his consulting firm, another $30,000. Various emergencies, car repairs, birthday gifts, Christmas presents, the number kept climbing. Over the past 2 decades, I'd given Wayne more than $200,000. Not loans, gifts, money I'd handed over because he was my son. Because I loved him, because I wanted to help him succeed. And tonight he'd stood in this very room, demanding more. Not asking, demanding. As if my life's work, my home, my security meant nothing compared to whatever financial hole he dug for himself. I thought I raised a decent person. Where did I go wrong? The question echoed in my mind as I sat there in the growing darkness. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its evening routine. I could hear the Hendersons' dog barking 3 houses down, the distant sound of television news from the Patel's place next door. But inside my house, there was only silence and the weight of a betrayal I was still trying to fully comprehend. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times. Margaret had inherited that clock from her mother, and it had kept perfect time for 43 years. Reliable, steady, trustworthy, everything Wayne apparently wasn't. I closed my eyes and let my head fall back against the chair's headrest. Tomorrow I would need to think clearly to decide what this confrontation meant for my future. But tonight, I just sat with the pain of discovering that the son I'd loved unconditionally saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his inheritance. The house creaked around me, settling into night. The morning had passed quietly. I made my usual breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, and read the Columbus Dispatch from front to back. The routine helped steady my nerves after yesterday's explosion. I'd even managed to tend to my small herb garden on the back patio, checking on the early spring shoots that were just beginning to emerge. Now I sat at my kitchen table with my afternoon coffee and the crossword puzzle, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. The house felt peaceful again the way it should. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains Margaret had hung years ago, casting gentle patterns across the oak table. When the phone rang, I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach tighten. Wayne. I let it ring twice more, my hand hovering over the receiver. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail to maintain the boundary I'd drawn last night. But another part, the part that had been his father for 42 years, couldn't ignore the call. Hello, Dad. I want to apologize for yesterday. I was wrong. The voice was different, softer, contrite in a way that Wayne rarely sounded. I sat up straighter in my chair, my grip tightening on the phone. Wayne, what happened? You never apologize. A pause. When he spoke again, there was something that sounded like genuine shame in his tone. I realized I was acting like a selfish person. The things I said about you dying about the house. Dad, I'm ashamed of myself. I stared out the kitchen window at Mrs. Patterson's rose bushes, trying to process this sudden change. In all the years since Wayne had become an adult, I could count on one hand the number of times he'd admitted being wrong about anything. I don't know, son. You said terrible things yesterday. I know I did. His voice cracked slightly. I've been under so much pressure lately, but that's no excuse. You didn't deserve what I put you through. Can we talk over dinner, please? My free hand drummed against the table surface. This felt wrong somehow, too convenient, too perfectly timed, but it was also what I'd hoped for during those long hours last night. Some sign that my son still had a conscience buried somewhere beneath his desperation. Wayne, Please give me a chance to make it right. The refectory restaurant today at 7. My treat. Let me show you that I could be the son you raised me to be. The refectory. Wayne knew it was my favorite restaurant. The place Margaret and I had celebrated every anniversary for the last 10 years of her life. He was pulling at every emotional string he could find. But maybe that meant something. Maybe it meant he remembered what mattered to me, that some part of him still cared about making things right between us. I looked around my quiet kitchen at the empty chair across from me, where Margaret used to sit for our afternoon conversations. The loneliness I usually kept at bay came rushing back. The reality of eating every meal alone, of having no one to share the small moments of each day. All right, I heard myself saying, but this is your last chance. Thank you, Dad. Thank you so much. 7 o'clock at the refectory. I promise you won't regret this. After I hung up, I remained sitting at the kitchen table for a long time. The crossword puzzle lay unfinished beside my now cold coffee. Outside, the afternoon sun continued its slow arc across the sky, but something had shifted in the quiet rhythm of my day. I wanted to believe Wayne's apology was genuine. I wanted to believe that yesterday had been rock bottom for him, and that he was ready to climb back up to being the man I try to raise. But there was a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind that whispered warnings I wasn't quite ready to hear. I stood up and walked to the calendar hanging on the refrigerator. Tuesday, March 11th. I circled the date with a red pen, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I sensed that this dinner would be important one way or another. 4.5 hours until I would learn whether my son had truly found his way back to me, or if this was just another kind of betrayal I hadn't yet imagined. I set down the phone and headed upstairs to get ready, my footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Despite Robert's absence of detail, Wayne's apology had sounded genuine, more genuine than anything I'd heard from him in years. Maybe people really could change. Maybe yesterday had been his rock bottom. Standing before the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection. The man looking back at me appeared older than I remembered, more weathered by recent events. Gray stubble covered my cheeks and chin, making me look tired, defeated. Tonight called for better than that. I lathered the shaving cream carefully, working it into a thick foam. The familiar routine felt meditative, purposeful. Each stroke of the razor removed not just whiskers, but some of the day's tension. This dinner mattered. If Wayne was truly ready to apologize, to make amends for yesterday's cruelty, then I owed it to our relationship to meet him halfway. Moving to my bedroom closet, I considered my options. The navy suit hung next to my charcoal gray, both pressed and ready. I chose the navy. Margaret had always said it brought out my eyes, made me look distinguished rather than just old. If we were starting fresh, I wanted to look my best. The ritual of dressing felt ceremonial. White dress shirt crisp and starched the way I'd learned to do in the Army 50 years ago. As I knotted my tie, I caught sight of Margaret's jewelry box on the dresser. She kept my cufflinks there, the silver ones her parents had given me for our wedding. 2 ties lay across the bed, burgundy and blue. The burgundy matched my favorite pocket square, but the blue had been Margaret's preference. Makes you look trustworthy, she'd always said. Tonight, I chose trust. I chose the blue. At Margaret's dresser, I opened the small bottle of cologne she'd given me for our 25th anniversary. The scent transported me instantly. Christmas morning, 1982. Margaret laughing as I tried to act surprised by the gift I'd seen her wrap 3 days earlier. For special occasions, she'd said, kissing my cheek. Tonight felt special in its own complicated way. I applied the cologne sparingly to my wrists and neck. Margaret would be happy to see us together again. She'd always believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. People make mistakes, Columbus, she'd say, after particularly difficult days with teenage Wayne. What matters is whether they learn from them. My wallet sat on the nightstand, thick with the month's pension check I'd cashed yesterday. I counted the bills, more than enough for dinner at the refectory, even if I insisted on paying despite Wayne's offer. Old habits die hard, and I'd been picking up checks for my children their entire lives. Keys in hand, I checked my reflection one final time. The man in the mirror looked presentable, dignified, ready to give his son another chance. Maybe I judged Wayne too harshly. People can change. Tonight will be a fresh start for our family. Walking toward the bedroom door, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Margaret's death. Hope. Real hope that our family might heal. That the harsh words of yesterday could be forgiven and forgotten. Wayne was still my son regardless of his mistakes. And sons, I reasoned, deserve the benefit of doubt from their fathers. I reached for the light switch, ready to head downstairs and drive to what I hoped would be our reconciliation. I reached for my coat, hanging by the front door, when my phone buzzed against my chest pocket. The sound cut through my optimistic mood like a blade through silk. I almost ignored it. Whatever message had arrived could wait until after dinner, but something made me pause, my hand halfway to the coat sleeve. The notification showed a text from Robert. "Call me urgently." My fingers suddenly felt clumsy as I dialed his number. Robert never used exclamation marks, never sent urgent messages unless something was seriously wrong. The phone rang once, twice, then his familiar voice answered. "Robert, what happened? Why so urgent?" "Columbus, your son Wayne called my office today. He was asking about your will." The words hit me like cold water. I leaned against the hallway wall, my carefully knotted blue tie suddenly feeling too tight around my neck. What exactly did he want to know? He asked if all property goes to him or if there's a share for Loretta. Then Robert paused. I could hear him choosing his words carefully. Then he inquired about contesting the will. "Contest it, but why?" My voice sounded strange in my own ears, hollow and distant. Through the front window, I could see the Hendersons walking their dog, the same evening routine they'd followed for 15 years. Everything outside looked normal, peaceful, while my world tilted sideways. "Columbus, I suspect Wayne is planning something bad. Be careful tonight." I pressed my free hand against the wall for support. The cologne Margaret had given me suddenly smelled too strong. Clawing. "Robert, are you sure?" Maybe he just wanted to understand. He asked specifically about your mental competency requirements, about what would happen if someone claimed you weren't of sound mind when you signed the documents. Sound mind? The phrase echoed in my head as pieces began falling into place. Yesterday's explosive demand for money, today's sudden convenient apology, the dinner invitation to a public place where witnesses could observe my behavior. My reflection stared back at me from the hallway mirror. An old man in a blue tie, dressed for dinner with his son, who might be planning to have him declared incompetent. The hope I'd carried downstairs evaporated, replaced by something cold and hard. "What should I do?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Don't go. Stay home. Let me handle this legally." But even as Robert spoke, I was shaking my head. Wayne thought he could manipulate me. Thought I was just another weak old man ready to be pushed around. He was about to learn otherwise. "No," I said firmly. "I'm going to dinner, but I won't eat or drink anything until I know exactly what he's planning." "Columbus, please. I've handled worse than my own son, Robert. But thank you for warning me." After hanging up, I stood in the hallway for a long moment, studying my reflection. The man looking back at me was no longer hopeful or naive. This was the Columbus who'd survived Korea, who'd built bridges that still carried traffic 40 years later, who'd buried his beloved wife and kept going. Wayne wanted to play games with his father's legacy. Fine, but he was maybe Robert is wrong. Maybe Wayne just wanted to know his inheritance rights. The light turned green, and I accelerated slowly, staying in the right lane. A young woman in a red sports car passed me, probably thinking I was just another cautious old driver. She wasn't wrong, but tonight my caution had a different purpose. No, after yesterday's fight, it all makes sense. But I can't believe my son would another red light. A homeless man stood at the corner with a cardboard sign, and I found myself wondering what had led him to that intersection. Bad decisions, bad luck, family betrayal. I reached into my wallet and handed him a $5 bill when he approached my window. He thanked me with genuine warmth, then moved on to the next car. At least someone would benefit from my evening preparations. I continued driving, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The familiar landmarks of Columbus passed by, the convenience store where I bought my morning newspaper, the pharmacy where I picked up my heart medication, the barber shop where I'd been getting haircuts for 30 years. This was my city, my life, my routine. Wayne thought he could just swoop in and claim it all. I'll be careful. Won't eat or drink anything until I'm sure of his intentions. The decision felt solid, logical. Wayne might be planning something, but he was dealing with a man who'd spent his career calculating load-bearing capacities and stress tolerances. I could handle whatever scheme my son had devised. As I turned on to East Broad Street, the refactor's distinctive sign came into view. The restaurant sat in a converted church, its Gothic architecture both beautiful and somehow ominous in the gathering dusk. Margaret and I had celebrated so many anniversaries there, back when I believed family meant something sacred and permanent. Traffic slowed as I approached the restaurant district. Office workers were heading home. Couples were arriving for dinner dates. Families were gathering for Tuesday evening meals. Normal people doing normal things. Unaware that somewhere among them a father was driving to confront his son's betrayal, I signaled for the turn into the restaurant's parking lot, my pulse steady despite everything. Whatever Wayne had planned, whatever trap he thought he was setting, I would be ready. The naive father, who dressed hopefully in his bedroom mirror, was gone. In his place sat a man who'd learned, perhaps too late, that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. But I would still be his father, even if he'd forgotten how to be my son. I parked in the restaurant's lot and sat for a moment, watching other diners walk toward the entrance. Normal families, normal couples, normal people who didn't suspect their loved ones might be plotting against them. The Gothic architecture of the converted church looked welcoming in the soft evening light, its stained glass windows glowing warmly. Wayne and Emily were waiting just inside the entrance, their faces lighting up with what seemed like genuine joy when they spotted me. Wayne rushed forward with open arms, pulling me into an embrace that felt completely different from his aggressive stance 2 days ago. "Dad, how wonderful that you came. I've been thinking about our relationship all day." Emily joined us, her smile radiant as she took my arm. "Mr. Lane, you look fantastic. Wayne told me how much he regrets yesterday." Their enthusiasm felt overwhelming, almost theatrical, but standing there in their warm embrace, surrounded by the gentle murmur of other diners and the soft classical music, Robert's warnings seemed paranoid and distant. "I want things to be good between us two, son." Wayne guided us to a window table he'd apparently reserved, one with a view of the downtown skyline twinkling in the gathering darkness. Emily helped me with my chair, fussing over my comfort like she'd never done before. The waitress appeared immediately, as if summoned. "We took the liberty of ordering wine," Wayne announced, gesturing to the bottle of Cabernet, already breathing on the table. "Your favorite vintage from when Margaret was alive." Emily filled my glass with practiced grace, her movements smooth and deliberate. "This will be perfect for our reconciliation toast." I raised my glass, feeling genuinely touched by their attention to detail. They'd remembered Margaret's favorite wine, chosen our old anniversary table by the window. Maybe I've been too quick to judge Wayne's motives. To family, Wayne said solemnly, his eyes meeting mine. To second chances, to forgiveness, Emily added, her voice warm with apparent sincerity. The wine tasted exactly as I remembered, rich, smooth, with hints of cherry and oak that Margaret had always identified for me. As we talked, Wayne seemed like his old self, the son who'd once helped me build a treehouse in our backyard, who'd call me every week during his college years. When the appetizers arrived, Emily pushed the bruschetta toward me. Wayne said, "This was your favorite here. The tomatoes are from the chef's garden." Course after course appeared, each dish seemingly chosen with my preferences in mind. Wayne carved the prime rib himself, placing the choicest cuts on my plate. Emily kept my wine glass filled, attentive to every empty bite. "Try this steak, Dad. The chef is a friend of mine. Prepare it specially for you." The meat was perfectly seasoned, tender enough to cut with a fork. Wayne watched me eat with satisfaction, his face glowing with what looked like paternal pride in reverse. "And this sauce is incredible. The restaurant's recipe," Emily added, spooning more of the rich, herb-laden sauce over my portions. Throughout the meal, they shared memories I'd forgotten. Family vacations, Christmas mornings, moments when Wayne had been the loving son I'd always believed him to be. Emily told stories about their marriage, their hopes for children, their desire to be closer to me in my later years. By dessert, the wine and their warmth had completely dissolved my earlier suspicions. This was my family, flawed, but loving, trying to heal the wounds we'd inflicted on each other. Robert's warnings seemed like the paranoid concerns of a man who dealt with too many divorces and family disputes. Wayne paid the check with a flourish, waving away my attempts to contribute. "Tonight's my treat, Dad. My apology." Walking to the parking lot, I felt lighter than I had in months. The cool March air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of spring. Wayne and Emily hugged me goodbye with what felt like genuine affection. "Let's do this again soon," Wayne said, his hand warm on my shoulder. I drove home with the windows down, humming along to an oldie station. The drive home had been pleasant, filled with thoughts of reconciliation and hope for our family's future. I'd even stopped at the corner store to buy Wayne's favorite coffee, thinking I might invite him for breakfast later in the week. The house felt welcoming when I returned, no longer the fortress I'd retreated to after yesterday's confrontation. I settled into my reading chair with the evening news, feeling more content than I had since Margaret's death. The wine from dinner had left me relaxed, almost drowsy. Around 10 o'clock, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and considered calling Robert to tell him his concerns had been unfounded. That's when the first wave of nausea hit. It started as mild queasiness, the kind you might blame on eating too rich a meal too quickly. I'd certainly indulged more than usual tonight, but within minutes the discomfort escalated into sharp, cramping pains that doubled me over in my chair. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I stumbled to the kitchen sink as bile rose in my throat. My legs suddenly unsteady beneath me. The cramping intensified, sending lightning bolts of agony through my abdomen. This wasn't indigestion from too much prime rib. The vomiting started without warning, violent retching that left me gasping and shaking. Between spasms, my mind raced backward through the evening. The wine Wayne had chosen, Emily's insistence that I try everything, the sauce she kept spooning onto my plate. Robert's warning echoed in my head. "Columbus, I suspect Wayne is planning something bad." My hands trembled as I reached for the kitchen phone, each movement requiring enormous effort. The numbers on the keypad blurred as another wave of nausea crashed over me. I could barely hold the receiver steady. 911. What's your emergency? Hello. Emergency services. I'm very sick. I think I've been poisoned. Address is 1247 Maple Street. Sir, stay on the line. What are your symptoms? Severe stomach pain, vomiting, dizziness. I ate dinner out tonight. And another spasm cut off my words. Sir, can you stay conscious? A crew is already heading to you. The dispatcher's voice seemed to come from very far away. I slumped against the kitchen counter, the phone sliding from my grip. Through the haze of pain, one thought burned clear. My son had tried to murder me. The sound of sirens grew louder outside. Red and blue lights flashed through my front windows, painting the familiar walls in emergency colors. Heavy footsteps approached the door. Mr. Lane, Columbus Fire, and EMS were coming in. A paramedic appeared at my side, a young woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She checked my pulse, shined a light in my eyes, asked questions I could barely answer. Mr. Lane, can you hear me? We're taking you to the hospital. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The man looking back was pale, aged years in a single evening. But beneath the physical distress, his eyes burned with something harder than pain. Understanding. The ambulance pulled away from Maple Street, carrying me toward Mount Carmel East Hospital and away from the house where I'd lived in innocent trust of my family for too long. Consciousness returned gradually, accompanied by the steady beeping of monitors and the antiseptic smell that defined hospital existence. Sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds, casting narrow strips across starched white sheets. My mouth felt cotton dry, and in 4-line, snaked from my left arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging beside the bed. I tried to sit up, but weakness kept me horizontal. The events of last night rushed back. Dinner, sickness, ambulance, the betrayal that had nearly killed me. Mr. Lane, you're awake. A woman in a white coat entered carrying a tablet, and wearing the expression doctors reserve for delivering serious news. She was perhaps 50 with graying hair pulled back and intelligent dark eyes that suggested both competence and compassion. "How are you feeling? You were brought in critical condition last night." "What happened to me, doctor?" "I'm Dr. Patel, your attending physician. We've been running tests all night." She pulled a chair close to the bed, sitting down with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for a difficult conversation. "Tests show presence of a strange substance in your bloodstream. Ricin. It's a plant-based poison derived from castor beans." The word hit like a physical blow. Ricin. Not some accidental food poisoning or sudden illness. Deliberate murder. But where could I have? The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. "Oh, my son, that scoundrel tried to kill me." Dr. Battel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Lane, if you suspect intentional poisoning, you need to contact police immediately. This is a criminal matter." Writing, I'd read about it in engineering journals years ago. Case studies of industrial accidents. Highly toxic, difficult to detect, nearly impossible to treat once symptoms appeared. Wayne had done his research. "How bad is it, doctor?" "You were fortunate. The amount in your system suggests someone wanted to make you very sick, possibly fatally so, but you received treatment quickly. With supportive care, most rice poisoning victims recover fully." Most victims. The words carried ominous implications about the minority who didn't survive. Dr. Patel continued with clinical precision. "Ricin typically takes several hours to manifest symptoms, which matches your timeline. Initial treatment involves removing the poison from your system and managing symptoms. There's no specific antidote." I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of Wayne's betrayal. Yesterday, I'd been a father hoping for reconciliation with his troubled son. Today, I was a murder victim who'd survived by luck and quick medical intervention. The police will need to collect evidence. Your medical records, details about where and when you believe exposure occurred. Evidence. The restaurant, the specially prepared meal, Wayne's insistence that I try everything, Emily's careful attention to my wine glass, their coordinated performance of loving family members, welcoming Dad back into the fold. How long before I can leave? Another day or two for observation. We need to monitor your kidney function and ensure all traces of the toxin are eliminated. After Dr. Battel left, I stared at the ceiling tiles and contemplated the new reality. My son, the boy I'd taught to throw a baseball, whose college education I'd funded, whose wedding I'd helped pay for, had tried to murder me for my inheritance. The family I grieved for, hoped to reconcile with, no longer existed. In its place stood cold-blooded killers, who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their financial security. Wayne thought he was dealing with a helpless old man. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. The taxi dropped me off at the Columbus Police Department's main building on Moroni Boulevard. Dr. Patel's discharge papers and medical records sat in a manila envelope tucked under my arm. Evidence that would put my son behind bars where he belonged. The fluorescent lights in the lobby buzzed overhead as I approached the front desk, where a uniformed officer looked up from his computer screen. "I need to report an attempted murder," I said, my voice steady despite the magnitude of the words. Within 15 minutes, I was seated across from Detective Sarah Mitchell in a small interview room that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. She was a woman in her mid-40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen enough family violence to take my case seriously from the start. "Mr. Lane, please tell me in detail about last night's events." I spread the hospital documents across the scratched metal table between us. The toxicology report showed ricin levels that could have killed a younger man or an older one who hadn't received treatment quickly enough. My son Wayne invited me to dinner after a fight we'd had Monday. Now I understand it was a trap. Detective Mitchell studied the medical records, making notes in a leather-bound pad. Her expression remained professional, but I could see the concern growing in her eyes as she absorbed the details of what Wayne had done. "Are you certain the poisoning occurred at the restaurant?" "Absolutely. Wayne insisted I eat that specific dish and drink that wine. His wife, Emily, kept refilling my glass, pushing different foods toward me all evening. I walked her through the entire sequence of events. Monday's explosive confrontation, Robert's warning about Wayne's suspicious legal inquiries, Tuesday's manipulative dinner invitation, and a carefully orchestrated meal that had nearly killed me. The reason was probably in the sauce, I explained, remembering Emily's insistence that I try more of the special preparation. The wine. They worked together, made sure I consumed enough to do the job. Detective Mitchell leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the notepad. Mr. Lane, this appears to be a clear case of attempted murder with premeditation. We'll need to arrest your son and his wife for questioning. The words sent a surge of satisfaction through me. Justice. Finally, justice. Wayne's been desperate for money, drowning in debt from bad cryptocurrency investments. He called my lawyer, asking about my will, specifically about contesting it if I were declared mentally incompetent. That establishes motive. Detective Mitchell said, making another note. Along with the medical evidence and your testimony, we have grounds for immediate arrest. She explained the process. Arrest warrants would be issued within hours. Wayne and Emily would be taken into custody, and a prosecutor would review the case for formal charges. As a primary witness, I would need to testify at trial if the case proceeded that far. Detective. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old man they could manipulate and then murder. They miscalculated. By 4 o'clock, Detective Mitchell had recorded my complete statement and logged all the medical evidence. She walked me to the lobby, shaking my hand firmly at the door. Mr. Lane, we take attempted murder very seriously, especially when it involves family members targeting elderly relatives. Your son and daughter-in-law will be in custody by tonight. I walked out of the police station into the late afternoon sunlight, feeling lighter than I had since before Margaret's death. The legal machinery was in motion now, grinding toward the justice Wayne thought he could avoid. 2 days had passed since Wayne and Emily were arrested at their suburban home, led away in handcuffs while neighbors watched from their doorways. The local news had picked up the story. Son attempts to poison father for inheritance, and my phone had been ringing constantly with reporters and distant relatives expressing shock. I ignored them all. Today I had business to finish. Robert's law office occupied the second floor of a brick building downtown, its walls lined with legal volumes and certificates that spoke of decades of practice. He'd been my lawyer for 15 years, handling Margaret's estate and my retirement planning. Today he would help me rewrite the future. Columbus, are you sure you want to completely exclude Wayne from the will? I sat across from him at the mahogany conference table, where we'd signed so many documents over the years. The new will lay open between us, its pages crisp with legal language that would strip Wayne of every cent he'd expected to inherit. Absolutely. A person who tried to kill me doesn't deserve a cent. Robert adjusted his reading glasses, reviewing the document one more time. We'd spend an hour going through every asset, every bank account, every possession I owned. The house on Maple Street, the retirement savings Margaret and I had accumulated over 40 years, the life insurance policies and pension benefits, everything would go to Loretta. The entire house, savings, pension funds, everything goes to Loretta. That's right. Loretta has always been a good daughter. My mind went to my daughter, who taught 3rd grade at Wilson Elementary and had never asked me for anything beyond birthday gifts for her children. She didn't even know about Wayne's arrest yet. I decided to wait until after the trial to explain everything. The shock would be devastating enough without the added burden of suddenly becoming wealthy. Robert leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with the careful attention he'd always given to important matters. Wayne might try to contest the will in court. Let him try. I have evidence of his crime. The attempted murder charge would be Wayne's biggest obstacle in any legal challenge. No court would award inheritance to someone who tried to kill the testator for that very money. The medical evidence alone would destroy any contest he might file. We'll include specific language about the criminal charges, Robert explained, making notes in the margins. That way, even if he's acquitted on a technicality, the will explicitly states your reasons for disinheritance. I watched him work, remembering all the times he'd helped our family through legal complexities. He'd handled Margaret's medical directives during her final illness, helped us set up trusts for the grandchildren's education, guided us through tax planning that had preserved our modest wealth. Now, he was helping me ensure that wealth went to someone who deserved it. The signing ceremony took place at 2 o'clock with Robert's secretary and paralegal serving as witnesses. I read through every page of the will, confirming that Wayne Lane was mentioned only to be explicitly excluded from any inheritance whatsoever. My signature felt different this time. Not the shaky hand of an old man making routine legal updates, but the firm declaration of someone taking control of his legacy. The notary's seal made it official. Wayne would get nothing. The will is now legally binding, Robert said as we shook hands. Wayne's attempted murder has cost him everything he thought he'd inherit. Walking to my car, I felt the satisfaction of a man who'd outmaneuvered his would-be killer. Wayne had gambled his inheritance on one deadly dinner and lost it all. The month since changing my will had passed in a blur of legal preparation. Wayne and Emily had been denied bail. Flight risk, the judge had determined, so they'd spent the weeks before trial in county lockup. Robert and I had met repeatedly with the prosecutor reviewing evidence and preparing for what promised to be a straightforward case. This morning, Loretta sat beside me in the courthouse hallway, her face still pale with shock from learning about her brother's crime. I told her everything 3 days ago, including her new status as my sole heir. She cried for an hour, grieving the brother she'd thought she knew. "Dad, I still can't believe Wayne would do something so horrible," she whispered as we waited for our case to be called. "People change, sweetheart. Sometimes they become strangers wearing familiar faces." The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows across the proceedings. A handful of spectators filled the gallery, mostly reporters and curious court watchers, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Wayne and Emily sat at the defendant's table with their court-appointed lawyers, both looking haggard from their month in custody. Wayne had lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. Emily kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Mr. Lane, please tell the court about the events of March 11th. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 30s named Jennifer Walsh, guided me through my testimony with practiced efficiency. I recounted the entire sequence. Wayne's desperate demands for money, his manipulative dinner invitation, the poisoning that had nearly killed me. Your Honor, my son invited me to dinner with the intention of poisoning me for my inheritance." In the witness box, I felt calm and focused. This was my moment to ensure justice, to make certain that Wayne's crime received appropriate punishment. The jury listened intently as I described the ricin poisoning, the hospitalization, the realization that my own son had tried to murder me. Tests confirmed the presence of ricin in the victim's system. The prosecutor announced, presenting Dr. Patel's medical reports to the jury. Wayne's lawyer attempted a defense of accidental poisoning, some far-fetched story about contaminated restaurant ingredients. But the evidence was overwhelming. Wayne's inquiries about my will, his financial desperation, the coordinated behavior at dinner, Emily's careful attention to my food and drink. When the jury returned after 2 hours of deliberation, their faces were grim. "Wayne Lane and Emily Lane, the court finds you guilty of attempted murder in the first degree." Wayne's composure finally cracked. "Dad, I didn't mean it was an accident." I looked at him across the courtroom. This stranger who'd once been my son. "An accident? You asked about my will the day before poisoning me." The judge sentenced them each to 15 years in prison with possibility of parole after 10. Wayne would be 77 when he got out if he lived that long. Emily, 65. Their lives effectively over, their futures destroyed by their greed. Loretta and I walked out of the courthouse together, leaving Wayne and Emily to begin their journey to state prison. The April sun felt warm on my face, promising renewal and fresh beginnings. "What happens now, Dad?" "Now we live, sweetheart. We live with integrity, the way your mother would have wanted." Justice had been served. My family's betrayer would spend the rest of his productive years behind bars, while my loyal daughter would inherit everything I'd worked to build. The moral order had been restored, and I could finally rest easy, knowing the right person would carry on our family legacy. Wayne had gambled everything on one poisonous meal. In the end, he lost far more than my inheritance. He lost his freedom his future, and any claim to being called my son. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.